when you've experienced something that breaks you free, you can always reference that to take you back to the path and to make sure that you're in the correct lane, even if you get off. And part of the path is going off of the path, because being off of the path is where the work is.
And I think the biggest thing is it's a recognition of what's already in front of you. Because I think, it's the human mind that is layering all these concepts on top of what we're perceiving and experiencing. And it's like you talk about love, peace, and oneness. It's about recognizing that it's already there, that your actual nature is that of peace. And, to understand that is to actually rest in that.
Hello and welcome to Pursuit of Infinity. I'm Josh, this is Joe, and today we are here to talk about some interesting topics around UFOs, Jake Barber. If you don't know who he is, you'll be very interested to hear this episode because we're going to go into some really interesting things he said. He's a whistleblower who apparently experienced some interesting things. But Joe, do you have a pretty good idea of who he is so you can describe him a bit?
Yeah. So Jake Barber was essentially he was a troubled kid, I guess. But he had military grandparents. So he had one grandfather in the Navy and another in the Army. And so he was having trouble in his youth. So his grandparents got together and decided he needs the military. So they pushed him towards the military. Jake Barber wanted to he was into it. He wanted to basically impress his grandparents. So once they sent him into the military, they didn't realize this, but it turns out that, some of these secret programs and like intel agencies, they sometimes actually look for people like Jake Barber that sometimes have troubled backgrounds. He was also he excelled in arts and music, and he was pretty highly intelligent. So he struck a lot of the boxes or checked a lot of the marks that these type of groups and programs look for. So when they put him into this military school type thing, they had no idea, but these I don't know, training courses and stuff that he was put into, they were knowingly kind of testing him for this type of stuff. So he was getting put into this different program where you get tested for things that not everybody who joins the Army gets tested for. So eventually, he goes into the Air Force, and he gets fast tracked through this training of special forces. So he was never actually, as far as I know, he wasn't actually a special forces tier 1 operator, but they forced him into this program where it kind of fast tracks you through that training. So he was trained at a very high level, and then, cut through his military career and how it starts getting into the weird stuff. At one point he gets recruited by this program, and they kind of want a plausible deniability for him. They want him to basically have a job title that doesn't say secret black program intel helicopter pilot. So he was forced to, well, I don't know, they wanted him to go to helicopter engineering school or whatever. So he actually had to go to this school and learned how to build helicopters, literally turn wrenches and take them apart. So his basic job title was the head of this helicopter company that repairs helicopters and whatnot. So he literally had to learn how to do all that. And really that was just a cover for him working for this aerospace black program. He said, Jake Barber, obviously he wasn't able to tell the public what companies he worked for, but he said he worked for 2 aerospace companies, and he said if you took 2 guesses, you'd probably get them both on the first try. So it's definitely Lockheed he was working for. And then the next one, it could be Northrop, could be Boeing, like it could be Boeing. There's a few. I would assume Lockheed is a given, and then probably Northrop, but I'm not sure.
Raytheon came to
Um,
my head right away too.
Raytheon maybe. So it's one of those top guys he was working for, and yeah. So he was put into these programs where he was um a helicopter pilot who would recover downed objects, like highly secret um downed craft or who knows what. A lot of times he said he would just be flying the helicopter and picking up a big box like a crate, and he wouldn't know what was in it, but it's all highly classified stuff. He's working for private aerospace, so it's not the our government at this point. And I don't know if you want to now jump into his first experience with something non-human, which was the egg. um
Yeah, I mean, this would be going into sort of what he described to Ross Coulthard, right?
yeah, the
Yeah.
egg was his first experience of something anomalous that he was sent to recover. And so basically, yeah, he goes out and he noticed that the protocol was different than normal. Everybody in his team, even the higher ups, seemed to be acting a little different, like something was not normal. So he, even before he saw the object, he knew it was something uh strange going on. Like it was not just your average day at the office. So he flies out there, and what do you know? He sees a uh 20-foot long egg. He said it was like white, um, but pearlish, like a pearl, so it had a shine to it. He looked at it through his because he was flying at night, so he's looking at it with his night vision, but he's flipping them up and looking at it with his naked eye as well. So it's like a 20-foot long egg. He's hovering 150 feet over it, and there's a ground crew down there. He has like a rope hanging from his helicopter, and I guess the ground crew gets this netting. And on that Ross Coulthart special, there is a video, and this is not from the Jake Barber retrieval, but there is a night vision video of a recovery of a supposed egg craft. So that video is out there, and supposedly this is essentially what he did. So I guess this is a common morphology of these UFOs that they recover. And so, they wrap it, the ground crew wraps this freaking egg up, this 20-foot long egg in this netting, attach it to his helicopter, and then off he goes. And that was his first encounter with something non human. And, you know, see, this is the thing where he was then asked, like, okay, how do you know that this object is actually non human? So his response to that is that, he's an expert in all things flying in the sky. While working for this aerospace company, he would work in this location in the desert where he would see all the most classified things that the military has and private aerospace. Um, and so he claims himself an expert. So he says, as an expert, I've never seen anything like this. It makes no sense. Um, it just doesn't add up to anything human that he's ever seen. And then he also said that he talked to people high up in the UAP task force, and they confirmed to him that this is non-human and that it is a common shape that has often been reported and recovered. Um, so for me, there's a little bit of question around that. Like, it's not 100% proof that it's non-human. It could be something human. It's definitely anomalous. But I kind of lean toward it being legitimately non-human because this is a shape that has been seen in the skies for hundreds of years, maybe millennia, but for sure, it's definitely common amongst the modern era. And you hear about it, in the deep past as well. But the egg shape is common. One of my sightings happened to be that exact shape. So I've seen this myself. Again, I can't prove that it was non-human, but I saw it in action. I saw these things moving through the sky at fairly low altitude, and there were no lights on them. There were just four, egg-shaped white objects in the sky, and like I said, at a low altitude, so they were dead silent. Anything that size and that low would be making like an insane amount of noise, and it was dead silent. And if I wouldn't have looked up at the exact moment, I wouldn't have seen them there. So I've seen this shape myself, so I tend toward believing this testimony. But of course, there's still questions around it. I don't know. Do you have anything to add to the egg?
I always find it so interesting, the question of whether or not what we're seeing that is anomalous is in fact non-human or some
Mm-hmm.
sort of non-human intelligence, because it definitely makes sense, considering when we're looking at something, we are basing our analysis of it off of what we know and what we think is possible, by humans.
Right.
But the problem is, we always say that the government is 20 years ahead of us in terms of technology. But I mean, it could be thousands of years. We have no idea what these, let alone the government, but what these private aerospace companies have. Because if you look into it, you realize that our elected officials don't have any oversight over what these private companies are doing. So they could have so much. And we all know that money rules the world, and money equals power. So it would seem to me that these companies have more power than our elected officials, which is, I mean, that throws everything into question. And
Right.
to me, before we start to get into like what we believe this stuff is, let's talk a little bit more about Jake Barber himself. I think one of the most interesting things about Jake Barber was when he was talking about uh, his time as a helicopter mechanic, and him and his group were tasked with doing all sorts of strange things. They were put on all sorts of strange missions. And the one that really stood out to me was he talked about these Panasonic Tough Books. Now, what a Panasonic Tough Book is essentially it's a laptop that can handle like anything. It's a very, very tough laptop. You can drop it off of a building, maybe, I don't know, or you can put it underwater, whatever. These are like really, really uh, tough laptops. So they were tasked with getting this these tough books, and apparently, uh, if I am remembering this correctly, they were, when they found the tough books did not have the hard drives in them, and the hard drives they actually then went to look for and they found underwater. Right, it was the hard drives that they found underwater, and
Yeah.
apparently, there were other groups of people that were hired by other private companies to find these as well. Like it was really essential to a lot of people that they have these hard drives, whatever happened to be on them. And they were in, like, their lives were in danger as they were trying to find these things. So that begs the question, like, what in the world could have been on these hard drives that was so essential to these people to get, that they were willing to, you know, kill people, essentially kill other competing groups, to get them.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure they said that they were tasked to find four of these tough books, and then you mentioned the hard drive situation. And before this is what caused Jake Barber to get out. This scenario that you just mentioned right here. I guess they retrieved two, and it's crazy. It's like movie esque, because he mentions the one they found. It was like in the Sahara Desert or some shit. Like, it was, and then maybe it was, I don't know. One of them was like on top of a mountain, and the other was at the bottom of a lake, like 25 feet underwater. So they had to basically gather intelligence to find where these could be and then retrieve these things. And as you mentioned, there were competing factions that were also trying to get these hard drives and these tough books. So obviously there is some information on there that is of the highest value. So Jake Barber himself he was totally unaware of what was on these. I mean, his job is just recover it, and but he speculates that there could be a lot of information about non-human technology on there. I mean, that information is of the highest order. It's essentially like if in 1940 there was all the nuclear information, it's as valuable as that. People say that the non-human technology is marked like top secret above nuclear technology. So you got to look at it through the lens of the military industrial complex and national security. Like, this is the highest order of classified, the most coveted information that exists. I mean, this is whoever gets this information is, thousands, millions of years ahead technologically. I mean, who knows? So we don't know what's on those tough books, but it's safe to assume that there's a good chance that some of it has to do with exotic technology, which is also possibly non-human technology. And on his last retrieval of one of these, as you mentioned, he was very vague about this. He didn't want to go into details, but he basically said, as you mentioned, that they were basically intercepted by another group who was looking to, get these tough books. And all he really said about it was shots were fired. So, did anyone die? I don't know. Like, there was some form of shootout, or some shots were fired, according to Jake Barber. And after that, he started questioning everything. And he was saying, like, that possibly he believes he was being set up by the people that sent him. So suddenly he's questioning everything in his position in this private aerospace organization and what he's doing. He even ended up going all the way to the top of, like, the whoever runs operations, and saying, what the hell's going on, what happened here, and the person at the top was unaware. So he's imagining that, if he's at the bottom, he called himself the fingertips of the operation. So he's actually hands on out there doing the grunt work. And then you have, let's say, the shoulder. This is how he described it, the shoulder being the top. He's thinking that he got maybe manipulated at the elbow. So whoever was in between him and the top could have sent him out there and his crew out there to be, maybe killed, maybe, I mean, who knows what. But he was very skeptical after this. So that scenario is actually what began his thought process on possibly getting out.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what went into that was the fact that he realized just how little he could trust the people he was working with. And when
Right.
that paradigm shift happens in you, it's like, okay, like now I'm truly in danger, and I'm in danger, like I'm not in danger in a way that, like, I know about what the risks are going into the mission. It's like I'm in danger in a way where, like, even the people that I'm working for might be the ones who are the source of the danger, which is just a situation you do not want to be a part of ever.
Yeah. It's like, I mean, it's all deception and lies. He's working for this company who is, like you said, possibly more powerful than governments. I would argue definitely more powerful than some governments. I mean, they have the highest technology, they have information that is inaccessible to our elected officials. I mean, our congressmen have no idea what they're doing over at Lockheed. And I mean, as far as exotic technology that has been recovered, Congress is supposed to know about this stuff. And, that's our extension. They represent the people to then, oversee these corporations in our best interest, but none of that is happening. So they're kind of rogue, and they have these militant groups, because even with Jake Barber and his crew, they're going out there to recover this stuff. They're fully strapped up. They got all the highest military equipment. They have the go ahead to use lethal force if anything goes wrong. They're allowed. I don't know how it all works, but he said multiple times that they are given the authority to use lethal force.
Yeah, this stuff happens outside of the law. They always say, oh, no one's above the law. But if you have a certain amount of money and power, the law just simply does not apply to you. And
Hmm.
that seems to be, what's happening here. And it's scary for a lot of people to contemplate the fact that, you know, the elected officials of our country aren't actually in control of our country, or at least aren't actually in control of some of the most important and secretive parts of our country.
Yeah, I mean, and at least now it's starting to seem like, I mean, whether we get it or not, there is this trend of transparency happening, and there are Congress people that are interested in this topic, and at least that's starting to move forward a little bit. Now, before we get into all of that and dive deep into it, do you want to talk about the other non-human craft that he recovered?
Oh, yeah, this is the one that was most interesting to me.
Yeah, me too.
So he apparently has been tasked at a certain point in time to recover a craft or something. I don't think he's ever really told exactly, what he's coming into contact with, but he goes over to recover this thing, and it's like a hexagonal, like jet
Oct.
octagonal. My
Yeah.
apologies. And it's black, and it was a little bit bigger than the tic tac or egg shaped thing, right? Because I mean, obviously the shape of it kind of lends to a larger volume. But so he grabs this thing, he attaches his straps to it. Generally, what happens is like he'll fly over, and then somebody else will be on the ground. A group of guys will be on the ground, and they're the crew that attaches it to his cables, and then he just kind of lifts it and brings it to where it's supposed to be. So as he's bringing this thing where where he's tasked to take it, he starts to have this emotional reaction to it. And at first, I don't think he was quite aware, like where the emotional reaction was coming from, because it started slowly. He started to feel this um, this strange connection with the object, and then it overwhelmed him as um, a feminine sort of entity, or like a feminine presence that brought pure love, and at the same time like a degree of sadness. And it affected him to the degree to which like his outlook on what spirit is and what the spiritual dimension is changed. And to me it's the most interesting thing, because I'm always asking, you see these documents that talk about the interaction with consciousness that these objects have, and we think about the typical mystical experiences that you and I have both had using other tools, and this guy is describing the exact same type of experience. He's flying this helicopter as a professional, and he's like starting to sob, and he's feeling this overwhelming sense of love and sadness at the same time. And after this experience, he said that it changed his life, and that it's constantly and always accessible to him, and that it is guiding his life, which to me sounds exactly like, a psychedelic experience, a mystical experience, whatever you may want to call it.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's still guiding him to this day. And it's why he's on the path of disclosure, why he came out as a whistleblower is part of this. And yeah, it's fascinating that a UFO can bring about an experience like that. Yeah, he said even as he's approaching the vehicle, and he is like getting this overwhelming sensation, and it just keeps getting, more and more powerful as he connects to it and begins to leave, and he's sobbing at one point. I mean, imagine it's at night, you're in a helicopter flying in, like, supposedly it was in I'm pretty sure he said the California desert, but there are mountains around, and it's like, dangerous terrain. It's nighttime, you're in control of one of these insane machines, meaning this like military copter hauling this fucking vehicle, and you're sobbing, crying, avoiding like mountains and everything. He contemplated, like, am I gonna have to drop this thing right here and abort this mission because it's serious business. It's your his life is in jeopardy, essentially. I mean, in this mission, because he is not in a state that he's ever encountered before. And Jake Barber is a clean cut guy. Like, he's exactly what you would imagine a high, like, tier 1 type military guy would be. He is not any like prior to this incident, he was not someone you would say is into like the woo woo aspect of things, or consciousness at all, or altered states or mystical experiences. So this guy has never had an experience like this, and then suddenly on a mission with, you got to imagine you're looking at an object on the floor, because he's flying above it, that looks to him clearly um exotic, and suddenly he's hit with this feminine energy. It sounds like, Mother Ayahuasca, or the divine feminine. He said it was beautiful is the word that he used the most. He kept saying beautiful, and then but also he mentioned sadness. So, and that is something that I have experienced, and I know you have as well, in these altered states or mystical experiences. So to me, this is the most fascinating case from a whistleblower we've heard so far, because it goes into a dimension that we haven't quite heard yet. Normally, with whistleblowers, we hear strictly of what they call nuts and bolts, physical craft, physical things that can be measured. And we don't often hear about the more mystical, metaphysical aspect of this stuff. Usually that's relegated to like uh, quote unquote like less serious aspects. It's not in the mainstream. It's not in the military whistleblower aspect of all this. It's not really talked about. There's the love and light side, so it's all beautiful, it's all divine, it's angels from the Pleiades that are here to save us. Or you get the other side where it's just purely nuts and bolts. And so at least with Jake Barber, there's kind of bringing those sides together in a sort of way, because we're dealing with a physical craft, and also we're dealing with a mystical experience. So I mean, that brings about all sorts of questions, like, what does this mean? And what was it coming from the object? um he said before they go on to retrieve an object, because he's retrieved all sorts of crashed vehicles, like human ones, and he's told before they go, they are made aware of if they're SOBs, which means souls on board. So they are told if there will be bodies. And he said that he's recovered craft with, he's never seen an ET body or a non human body, but he's recovered, down vehicles with human bodies. So they're told when there's bodies. So for this incident, they weren't made aware of any SOBs, no souls on board. So we're led to believe then that there were no bodies in the vehicle, or no bodies involved in this incident. And so was it the craft itself? Was it a just something that is present always, that you can connect with? Um, so it brings about a lot of questions. But yeah, for sure, that is the most fascinating incident I've heard thus far. Um, do you have anything else to add on the octagonal craft? Well, first, I guess it's worth mentioning that he said it was, I think you said around 25, maybe 30 feet, and then it was like matte gray to black, so it was like a dark color. Didn't see any lights or anything on it. As I don't know if he mentioned if it was seamless or not. I would imagine it was. Usually, that's one of the things. He said the egg was seamless, no rivets and anything of that sort. But yeah. Other than that, I don't know. Do you have anything you want to add on to this incident?
Well, something else that they're usually told when they're going to retrieve something is whether or not there's any type of like radioactive stuff they have to be informed of, any kind of danger involving some kind of radioactive material. And I believe it was this one, if I'm correct, where after the experience and after he had finished his mission, he had gotten some very severe physical ailments, to say the
Here,
least.
let me interject quick.
Hmm.
Because what you're talking about, another part of his job that happened a lot is they would be sent, like I mentioned, to retrieve these crates, these like boxes that he's unaware of what's inside. And that one of these scenarios is what led to what you're about to start describing. It wasn't with the craft, this was with the crate,
Gotcha.
one of the
Yes.
crates.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong, but some of the stuff that he was talking about was like his skin burned off or something like that.
He
Like it
said
it
his skin
peeled.
was, like, falling off,
Yeah. And
essentially like it was heavy sunburn.
yeah, yeah. He had he had cognitive issues as well. I want to say headaches, like things like that, just like very anomalous but broad, um, weird physical symptoms
He
from something. And he was studied by Dr. Gary Nolan, who, is a biologist and immunologist, right? And he had determined that, there's no known cause that we can determine that could have caused all of these symptoms to happen the way that they did, which is like another anomalous thing.
he, also he mentioned, like, all the hair on his body fell out, all of it,
Yeah.
like, he had no eyebrows, like, no pubic hair, no nose hair, no ear hair, so he was, like, losing his skin, losing his hair. And it all kind of adds up to like gamma ray radiation, like he was some type of radiation. And it's interesting because he also talks about, when they are sent out to retrieve something that is, dangerous, they are made aware of that before they go out. And they have a whole set of hazmat protocol that they prepare for this type of thing and go out and retrieve this stuff in a safe way so nobody has any of these injuries. But for this one, there was none of that. So he also speculates, and he makes it clear that he's speculating that possibly what was in this crate might have been non-human, but he kind of backtracks and says maybe not, because it's maybe too far of a leap. But he said it was maybe something exotic for sure, because he doesn't blame the higher ups for not um, setting them up to wear hazmat gear and all that. So he's thinking that they were unsure of what's in the box or unsure of the capabilities of what's in there. And if it's something non human, then you could, understand why that could go wrong. And he assumes possibly that it was maybe turned on or turned off while he was flying it and then gave him all these health effects. And like you mentioned, he works with Dr. Gary Nolan now to try to help him with all this because he still has occurring symptoms. Um, he has a heart murmur after this that he's never had before. And it's interesting because he has a lot of the same symptoms that other people have gotten from interacting with non-human craft, like from a close encounter. A lot of these incidents um, have the same type of health effects that happen. Rendlesham Forest was a case that happened over in England. It's one of the most famous UFO encounters where it was like a joint military base with America and England, and it was basically a series of nights. There's like 3 nights where there were sightings. Without going too deep into that, at one point, one of the nights, a craft had landed, and some one of these guys approached the craft and had a like very close encounter with it. And this guy has all the exact same symptoms that Barber has had. So it's all the exact symptoms, plus even the heart murmur. So the heart murmur is something very unique. And this guy, I think his name was Pedalston. I forget which one it was. One of the witnesses that got close to the object, and it was like this triangular craft that had landed in the forest at this base, had all these same symptoms. So that's another reason why he's thinking it's possibly exotic technology or something non-human, because it's the exact same thing that this guy got from Rendlesham.
You know, it's interesting because the next question that I always ask myself is, are these people credible? What are we really hearing here? Because we know that there's controlled opposition when it comes to disclosure. There is a concerted effort to spread information that is uh like not true, but that is salted with the truth,
Right.
so that we are, more susceptible to believing it. And this is happening all throughout the disclosure community. And it's happening with not just the UAP topic, but with everything, Epstein and all this, JFK, all these things, I think, are the information that comes to us is heavily manipulated. So then I always have to ask myself, especially because we are kind of getting far down the road of disclosure at this point. Disclosure is a pretty big thing. The UAP topic is just uh, gaining a lot of popularity and attention. So then I ask myself, is Jake Barber the real deal? Is this guy telling the truth? Is this guy trying to, because at one point in time, he was tasked with spreading misinformation through this community. And apparently he started to backtrack that and sort of quote unquote switched sides. Um, Personally, I don't know if it's because of my bias, but I do believe that he is legit and he's telling the truth. There are plenty of people that I also trust that are validating his story and validating him as a person. And he seems to me like the kind of guy that is being honest. And again, I know maybe this is, my bias, but when he spoke about that spiritual experience he had, to me, that hit home in a way that just really rings true personally to me.
Yeah, and it also doesn't quite, fit the exact narrative that we have been being told. I mean, a lot of people are they make the argument against the mainstream narrative that it's like this threat narrative, that it's always, talking about national security and we should be afraid of the UFOs and it's this and that. And Barber kind of came at it with the opposite. He talks about having this beautiful mystical experience. He talks about it being benevolent in his experience. So he's not really amplifying the threat narrative. All the while, he is aware of the national security aspects of it. But you mentioned how he was told to kind of infiltrate and sow some misinformation. There was an aspect of that where he was sent to Greer's press conference in 2023, I believe it was, where Greer got together a bunch of people in Washington he had a couple of witnesses or whistleblowers, and Jake Barber was sent there. And I guess the reason he was sent there, I guess, was to confront Greer about those tough books he was looking for, because they had only recovered two. And I guess he wanted to confront Greer. So there were multiple reasons of him being there, but he wanted to confront Greer and tell him, like, straight up, listen, like, somebody might come forward to you with this information, like with these tough books. And this is a serious national security threat. So he was basically telling Greer, like, you can't, you can't put this out there. Like, if someone comes forward with these tough books, we need this, for our national security. Um, but also while he was there, he ended up, meeting Greer, telling him all that. But he heard Mike Herrera's story, which he was a Marine in Indonesia who basically had an encounter with an octagonal shaped craft. Although it was much larger than the one that Jake Barber had retrieved, it was very similar. And, Jake is seeing this Marine standing on stage, like wearing a suit and tie, like totally out of his element, spilling his guts out with this story. And, a lot of people were criticizing Herrera, like thinking this is bullshit. It's too crazy. And, he Barber said that his story kind of touched him. So he connected with Herrera. And that was also a point of his transition from deciding to become a whistleblower. And so he, got in touch with Herrera and got in touch with Greer and all that. And this event was somewhat of a turning point for him.
Yeah, to me, that's part of why I tend to believe him because I mean, it seems like a pretty logical evolution in ideology, and the fact that the octagonal shape affected him so much, spiritually, I think went into how he was able to connect with Herrera and,
Hmm.
the impact of hearing somebody else describe, the same type of craft that affected you so much. And then I also think about like, to me, I think the one that Herrera saw was a human creation based off of the one or a version of the one that Barber picked up. Because
Hmm.
I think the difference being now we don't have a grasp as humans on this planet of consciousness, what it is, the spirit world, at least as far as I know. So it would seem logical to say that if there is one that interacts with human consciousness and then another that doesn't, if one is created by humans, it's probably the one that doesn't interact with human consciousness because Herrera said nothing of the sort. But Herrera saw this one operational, it was moving, right?
Hmm. Yeah, he saw it. It was hovering. Essentially, with Herrera, he was in Indonesia. Indonesia had just been hit with like a 7.0 earthquake, so it was like a major catastrophe. And he was stationed over there with Marines, so they were, helping out. And they were moving through the forest, and they see, like, through the trees, it's like it's obscured. He couldn't quite, or obstructed, I should say. He couldn't quite see it, but there's an object. And they eventually make it through the clearing, and they see this octagonal craft, but it was like huge, hovering, and it was like rotating. So it was hovering off the ground and slowly spinning. And as they're seeing this, it's like, holy shit, what am I looking at? They kind of get ambushed by a group of guys who are armed and wearing all black gear. So there's no military insignia or nothing that would show they're from any government or country. But they start talking and they have American accents. So it's clear that these are Americans. And they're basically holding their guns up at Herrera and his crew. They take Herrera's guns away, and his Marines take all their weapons away, and this black team is all talking to each other saying like, should we smoke these guys, should we kill these guys? So Herrera and the Marines are scared for their lives. They have no idea what's going on. um Long story short, um Herrera ends up being let go, but they see these crates, these giant crates with like AC units on them being loaded up into this UFO with like trucks. So you got to imagine this is very large, this UFO, because it's getting all this stuff like driven up into it, um, and then being flown away. They see the craft basically disappear in an instant. It's just like snap and gone. Um, so Herrera speculated that it was like some criminal organization, some like drug running or weapons. Um, but Jake Barber had met with Herrera during that press conference, and Barber was the one to inform Herrera and Greer that it was actually human beings inside those crates. So a whole narrative spun out of this that it's like illegal human trafficking going on, and some evil doing. But Barber insists that it probably wasn't that there's like one of two options, according to Barber, that this was an operation of this team recruiting psionic assets, which I guess we'll get into next. Basically, psychic people that they use as an instrument to summon craft. So it was either they were like recruiting people for that, or they were actually in the middle of a psionic operation when this uh, hurricane or sorry earthquake happened. So we don't know exactly what was going on, but those were two options that Barber had speculated on. So I don't know. Do you want to go into the whole psionic asset thing?
Yeah, that to me is like so interesting. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
because we have heard for years and years that remote viewing has been a thing. So we know that the government, CIA, big organizations, big powerful groups of people are investing in psychic abilities to put it bluntly. And what a psionic asset is essentially is someone who has the ability to put themselves in a meditative state and to, as Greer would call, invite a craft. And because these crafts are possibly controlled by consciousness or for sure interact with consciousness in a particular way, these people are able to not only invite the craft, but sort of take over control of the craft and then land it. And I mean, that is a wild thing to say on News Nation for, a wide variety of people who pay attention to mainstream media to hear.
Yeah, I think for most people it's a bit much, especially people that aren't into the UFO topic, and even some that are, because there are a lot of people who follow this topic who are not about talking about consciousness or remote viewing. But the more deeply you investigate the topic, there is a clear connection between um, the psychic abilities. I mean, first off, so many people who have had close encounters experience telepathy. I mean, that is a common thread. Um, but yeah, as far as the psionic assets, they recruit people who, and train them in remote viewing and other types of psychic activities. And supposedly they are able to interact with these objects, make them appear, and even make them land. That's the claim. Um, they say that they often recruit from certain demographics, which is kind of makes sense with the Indonesia thing, that they're trying to source psionic assets from even the third world or non-Western countries. Basically, groups of people that are more in touch with nature, ingesting less toxins, less firmly grounded in their materialistic worldview. So you got to imagine, as Americans, we eat poorly. We are pretty shut off to the idea of psychic abilities culturally. We are not in touch with nature very much. So it would make sense that they would go to, one of these other countries and try to recruit assets from over there. So it would make sense that they would go to some other places and try to recruit these psionic assets. Interestingly enough, they mentioned that first off, women are supposedly more inclined or good at this. And another thing they said was left handed gay men are good psionic assets, which is weird. But Native Americans are often brought up as well as being more inclined to have these abilities or more easily trained. A lot of people would say that everybody does have this ability. It's just a matter of harnessing it, one thing, and then also, I would imagine having a clean body, a clean lifestyle, and an open mind is probably important as well.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that, supposedly everybody has this ability. And they say the same thing about remote viewing. There are, innate psychic abilities that I think every human has that we just aren't in contact with because of the things that you mentioned. The reason that they look to third world countries because we are ingesting toxins and we are grounded in the material world and we're distracted by all the things around us constantly. And the last thing most of us are thinking about is, I wonder how high I can get with the meditative state. Some of us are thinking that, some of us are.
Hmm.
And I think the amount of people that are becoming interested in consciousness work is just rising and rising. And it's interesting, I always talk about merging like the spirit world and the technological world to becoming like, superhuman, because that's to me the key to our evolution. And the UAP and UFO topic just nails that down for me because it seems that the UFO topic is right there. Like it's on the cutting edge of materialism merged with, you know, the world of spirit or the consciousness world or, whatever you may want to call it.
Yeah, it's almost like the phenomenon is it's guiding us or teaching us a lesson. Because by observing it and by investigating it, it's kind of forcing us to merge these things. So it's almost, you could look at it as a teacher in a sense. Because I've always said if you investigate the UFO topic properly, it will change your life and it will send you down all sorts of rabbit holes. You begin with the UFO topic and you start looking into wow, the crafts and close encounters and different sightings and it's fascinating. Wow, it's gone out throughout history and it seems like it's a real phenomenon. So many people have reported it throughout time. But then you start going down different avenues into consciousness and the mind and psychic abilities and the soul and metaphysics and all sorts of things. So the UFO topic is like, it's like a tree that its branches touch everything. So it's to me, it's a good entry point. So I think that the fact that the UFO topic is gaining more popularity is a good thing, and it's going to inevitably start to bring about other questions about reality itself and human beings and our own capabilities.
Yeah, and you even think about people like Terence McKenna and Carl Jung and a lot of the mystics of our world, have delved into this topic as well. And they just so happen to be into psychedelics or meditation or
Hmm.
psychology or, myths and, symbology, all of the deepest aspects of the human being. They always sort of like lead you down the same path. You say that
Hmm.
UFOs are, very often a great entry point, and there are many entry points, and they all
Yeah.
seem to lead to the same spot, or like the paths are all paved, with the same material. It's very interesting to me.
I um I wanted to touch back on something you mentioned earlier. Um you were talking about the military being supposedly 20 years ahead of us technologically, and, maybe 50 years, or depending who you ask, it could be, you know, who knows? But I think that could have been true for most of the history of at least like modern technology and America, essentially. But you have to think now we're approaching the point of singularity essentially with general AI and, genetic engineering, all this different stuff. So at some point, even if they were 1 year ahead, they're going to reach the singularity first, right? So then at that point, they're instantly, infinitely ahead. Because at the point of singularity, it goes from human beings being able to reasonably predict the future of our technology and what humanity is. At the moment of singularity, it's like a graph going slightly up to just a vertical line going directly up. So if they're even, like I said, 1 day ahead of us technologically, they're going to reach the singularity first. And then they are a superhuman organization on Earth and they control all aspects of reality. I mean, This is another topic that is often talked about in the UFO lore is time travel. So let's say if time travel is possible, then it already exists, given the very nature of it, you know? So if the singularity happens and some group at Lockheed suddenly has the ability to alter time and, bounce around from the past and future, suddenly you have a breakaway civilization, which is another thing talked about in UFO, in like the UFO circles, is possibly some of this craft is human, but it's a breakaway civilization. There are human beings on this planet that have an existence that we're totally unaware of, that they are basically just the elite of the elite that can control things and manipulate things in ways we will never know of or see. And, if one of these groups hits that singularity before we do, and let's say that leads to some aspect of time travel, suddenly you have this group that is able to control all aspects basically of our reality. So they could, to maintain their power, they could halt us from, as, a population, as a society, of ever reaching that singularity. They could do a lot of things to alter the timeline. Like, there's this book, Gods of Eden. I haven't read the whole book, but basically, this guy, he set out to research how the elites have basically created wars all throughout human history for financial benefit and gain of power and monetization and all that. So this guy set out to research that and ended up falling into UFOs and non-human intelligence and weird stuff. And one of the stories is interesting where he talks about the Black Plague. And, we weren't really taught this, but supposedly this is what happened. When the Black Plague was starting, they would they were reports of people coming down from the sky, and they would have their faces covered, and they would be hooded, and they would have these objects in their hands that looked kind of like uh what do you call that thing that the Grim Reaper holds?
Like a scythe.
Yeah, like that that I don't know, it was some object they would hold, but that they were spraying the fields with. So these people were coming down from the sky, and they were wearing this shit covering their face and spraying the fields, and they were spraying even people's doorsteps, and like the townspeople were terrified of them, and they would run away and this and that, and suddenly Black Plague happens. And this is the reason I mentioned the Grim Reaper, is because this is actually where the image of the Grim Reaper comes from. Is from these people that were coming down, spraying the fields, spraying the town, spraying the houses, and then outbreak of the Black Plague. And then, you look at the Black Plague, it delayed the Renaissance for 200 years. So if the Black Plague never happened, you can extrapolate we would already be on Mars. You know what I mean? So the idea is that whoever these are, let's say if there is such thing as a breakaway civilization that has time travel, they could bounce around the timeline and essentially create incidents that basically delay our advancement technologically, or so it's an interesting theory, but you have to think about these groups, and if they are ahead of us technologically, what that actually means.
Yeah, it makes me think of like people often, I think, misinterpret this type of idea as the simulation where
Mm,
there's and this is I have like an interesting like the way that I think about it is, you know, if you want to bring in like a video game aspect to it, when you talk about time travel, you think of like the game Animal Crossing where, you know, you can as the, higher dimensional being, you can project yourself onto this two-dimensional screen and you can control time. You can go to and
mhm,
from time. Also, what I always say is like you see how, this microphone here is a three-dimensional object and it's casting this shadow right here on me, which is a two-dimensional shadow. And I often think of this phenomenon as being higher dimensional than the third dimension, and then being able to cast itself into our dimension, into the third dimension. And it makes me think of like, if you think of like a side scroll game, think about like Super Mario, any video gamers out there. You've got this side scroll game, but then you take it to the other level, which is Mario Maker, which is a game where you get to actually create the levels. You can create the design and change the look of everything. So it's essentially like this third dimensional entity who's controlling a two-dimensional world. And I think a lot of people think about this as the simulation theory, but
Hmm.
to me, that's where they go a bit wrong. But I think they're on the right track where there is a potential to have some kind of a higher being. As you say, it could be humans. It could just be humans that are able to, with the technology that they have, whether it be time travel or whatever, to manipulate all events that happen here in our world. In which case, that's to me like the negative, kind of scary end of things, because what that means is that we essentially have zero control, like
We're
over
doomed.
anything. Yeah, we're doomed. We're,
Right.
we're doomed to
Yeah.
continue this cycle of what we're in over and over and over, because there's always going to be something that is just ahead of us that we can never touch.
Right. Well, the if you look into this basically the idea that I just laid out, it isn't all doom and gloom because if you look back throughout all of human history, let's say this exists, that at some point human beings, who knows, it could be 1,000 years in the future, whatever, create time travel and bounce all around the timeline, creating our history as we know it. In all these ancient civilizations, there's always two ends to the spectrum. So the idea is that, you have angels and demons, or you have, like, for instance, let's go to the ancient Sumerians. The idea would be that you have Enki and Enlil. And the idea is that these are essentially human beings, two sects of human beings. And there's always like a good one and a bad one. And let's say even if you go to like ancient Greece, you have the gods of Olympus and then you have the Titans. So there's always like a battling force. So there there isn't uniformity, necessarily all doom and gloom. There could be polarity there, whereas there are people fighting on behalf of humanity and others fighting on behalf of control and empire. So, for instance, like we talked about this the other day, there's always the symbolism of the serpent and the eagle. So the serpent meaning kind of spiritual enlightenment, kind of unity of human beings, and then the eagle being empire, war, control. So these things have existed throughout all of human time, and there's always a polarity there. Um, I also wanted to touch on another thing because I think even if something like that did exist, I think there's at least another phenomenon taking place here. Um, there are different ways we can look at this. Is there many like different alien races or non-human intelligence interacting with humanity, or is there one singular phenomenon that wears many masks? So kind of like Jacques Vallée with Passport to Magonia. Like the cover of that book, it shows basically an entity that wears many masks. So is it one phenomenon that shows itself to us in different ways in different eras? So you look back to, different cultures, they have, the fairies, the elves, they have all these different non-human entities that interact with humanity, and there are a lot of similarities from those to the alien phenomena that we are encountering now. So, is it just one singular phenomenon, like one ultra intelligence that essentially can present itself in any way it wants, or just maybe even just control the human mind or affect human consciousness in a way that it just appears in, a certain fashion?
Yeah, to me that it's so hard to think about that, because when you start to go down one of those idea paths, you sort of prove yourself wrong the farther down you go. It's like, to me, again, it always brings about this concept of paradox that you can even think about it as, humans. Are humans all one or are humans individuals? Well, we're kind of both. So to me, it almost seems like this phenomenon it's part of one larger thing, like one larger singular thing, but it's also a bunch of different ways it's presenting itself, which is why I like to think of it as something higher dimensional projecting itself into a lower dimension, because in that way it can sort of project itself as anything, or it can project itself as something that is ingestible or consumable by the human senses. And that to me lends itself to the aspect of flying craft, like we're seeing something that we can understand as technology. We're seeing something that we can recognize as potentially organic because it's interacting with our consciousness at the same time. So to me, it's like, I think it's kind of both. And I know it's kind of a cop out way to look at things, but I just find that whenever I go down each of these paths, it seems like there's just no singular answer that I can come up with.
Yeah, and you think about, we see nowadays the non-human intelligence that we attach to the phenomenon is often the grays, which, look more or less human. Um, which is probably, like, I guess you would say improbable. If What are the chances of all life that it ends up turning out basically with, two arms, two legs, walks upright, looks similar to us, which, that leads to the idea that it could be future humans, or more along the lines of what you were saying. When we want to interact with, let's say, you see these videos of, people, like a guy wearing a panda suit and entering the panda cage at the zoo to, trick the panda essentially. So maybe these things are just showing themselves in a way that resonates with us. It could be that they are something differently entirely, like a higher dimensional intelligence that can cast itself down on us and, present itself in a way that is more digestible, let's say.
And then that would sort of imply that they have an intention, whoever they are, whatever they are. There's some sort of intention that they have, and they're discreet. Like they want to be seen, yet they don't want to be fully discovered, or maybe we're not capable of fully understanding what it is that they truly are. It kind of reminds me of like the McKenna thing. He would say that when he would take 5 dry grams of mushrooms in silent darkness, at a certain point he would ask the mushroom to show itself to him for what it truly is. And then he said, what would happen is he would get this experience that was just he couldn't handle it. It was just so intense that there are no words, and he could not handle the intense, like like the growing intensity of the mushroom showing itself to him for what it truly is. So he'd have to say, okay, stop, 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 like, okay, that's enough. And at a certain point, I think that all humans have that part of us where we're just like, we have our curiosity and we have the explorer's mentality that we want to discover as much as possible and go as deep as possible. But at a certain point, it's like, okay, like that's enough. And maybe that point is, the brink of insanity or something like that. So maybe whatever their intention is, if there is a they and they are projecting themselves into our reality in a way that we can interpret and digest, maybe their intention is to disclose themselves to us, but in just small tiny increments so that we're able to grasp it in a way that eventually we'll be able to understand it. Maybe that's the singularity, when humans are able to understand what it is that is projecting itself to our dimension from a higher dimension.
And, these are, truly intelligent beings, this is the way that they would disclose themselves. I mean, people talk about, Well, why don't they land on the White House lawn and this and that? Well, the idea is like if you have to actually extrapolate that out to what that would mean. If suddenly these beings show up and they have this magnificent technology, I mean, you just totally destroy humanity and what it is. Because suddenly humanity stops being humanity and we just start worshiping these things as gods. And we just like kind of look to them as a parent, like we're a toddler and they're a parent. And we want their technology. It's like, oh, wow, that's so amazing. Like, let us have that. Instead of being human beings ourselves and creating our own things, we will look to these gods, these higher beings, for what they already have. And I think a truly intelligent species would recognize that if we show up, we are going to totally interject with their natural progression as human beings. And they're suddenly going to look to us, this higher intelligence, for everything. We'll want them to solve all of our problems. And then, we don't have to deal with anything ourselves. I mean, a lot of people look at the UFO topic in this sense. They think that they are here to save us and they're going to stop nuclear war from happening. And, they're these benevolent beings that are just going to make sure nothing terrible happens to us. But terrible things happen. And I think, the same way, sometimes you got to let your toddler touch the stove so they learn. I think a higher intelligence would do the same thing for us. I don't think they're going to interject and stop us. I think they're letting us be humans. But since they are exposing themselves to a small degree, there might be some purpose they have to be some type of guiding force. They want us to see them for some reason. Maybe to push our imaginations, like to open our minds to what is possible. If you see a UFO and you see it move in a certain way, then you know it to be possible. So it pushes those bounds a little bit. And a lot of inventors, like you talk about Tesla or even like Jack Parsons, who's was like the father of rocketry in America, they all talk about like a connection with a non-human intelligence that inspired them or helped them to create technology. So whatever this intelligence is, it is, as Elon Musk says, it's very subtle. And it's true, it is subtle. What else would it be? If it's overt, it does not seem very intelligent to me. It seems like um, brutish and unintelligent to just like show up and just like throw a wrench into everything that is humanity.
Yeah, I think there is a very integral aspect of humanity that looks to a hero to come and save us. All of our
Right.
best stories are about a hero that comes and saves everybody, one singular entity that has the power to change everybody and save the whole world. So I definitely think that is an aspect of the way that people interpret things. Um, and it makes me think like, there is this aspect of it where, we are looking for something to save us, but all of the most important learning experiences of our lives, or even tools that we use to learn the most valuable lessons of our lives, are always tools that give you the power to do it yourself. So, I always ask what's the connection between psychedelics and the UFO? And the connection very well might be that whatever this thing is, whatever the psychedelic is, whatever the Gaian intelligence is, whatever the intelligence of these UFOs are, maybe the common thread is that what they're doing is they're trying to give us the tools to expand our awareness to a degree that we're able to ask new questions. We're able, and because what I've always kind of wondered about every kind of animal is I think that the key to understanding is our ability to ask the right questions. And I think that if a being can ask a question, it has the innate capability of answering that question. My dog can only ask a few certain questions, it can only discover certain things because it can only ask the questions to itself, possibly, if I'm thinking of it in English terms, like when's breakfast, when's lunch, when's dinner, when is the walk, when, you know what I mean? it's got a certain set of questions that it can ask itself. And then its discovery or its potential for knowledge is based off of the types of questions that it can ask. And that's kind of where our ideas come from too. We ask, how can I get this machine that is driving to drive in the air? We ask ourselves that question, we come up with the airplane. We ask ourselves, how can we create a method of communication where I can talk to somebody that is across the world? We come up with the internet. Maybe the next set of questions are, you know, who am I? What am I? What is the thing that I'm seeing? And a new set of questions will arise when we start to see things or observe things through our senses that break the modern thought of what is possible, like these craft and the way that they move.
And you look at all the amazing technology that we have today, and you mentioned like the car, like look, how can we make this fly? And I think, you, all of the questions we ask, all the great things we have, it's come from human beings observing nature and asking questions. Like I would imagine the only reason that we've made a machine that could even fly is because we've seen birds fly. I mean, that we've mimicked the bird to create our airplanes. So it's like nature, we observe it, we ask questions, and then we can replicate it and give ourselves, amazing technology and incredible things. And I think you're right. The questions we ask are what's most important. And then actually understanding, because I agree with what you said, that there is an answer. If you can ask it, you can seek an answer. And, the answer might not be what you want it to be, or it might, I don't think the answers are always even able to be articulated, but they are knowable. Like you can get an answer if you can formulate the question. And you mentioned there at the end, and I agree with this, the next set of questions that I think we should be asking is about the self and the nature of reality itself. And I think in asking those questions, we will answer many questions about the phenomenon that we're seeing. It's interesting to me how far we can go throughout life and without asking the question of like, what am I? And understanding that, because we've come so far in the western world with our technology and our investigation of the behavior of nature, all the while ignoring the question of what is nature or what am I. And I think in asking those questions you can come to the profound realization that you are nature. You're not just some separate thing tossed into nature. It's like you are the thing in itself. Like you are the universe being a human, Like just like how you say it, like the universe is peopling. It's like we're a verb of the whole thing rather than a single piece of the thing. We often like to think of ourselves as separate and like a separate entity inside of the universe itself, where I don't think that's the case at all. I think we're inseparable. Clearly, I mean, you can clearly come to that realization that we are not. There is zero separation. There is only the whole thing in itself. It's just doing so many things at once, where the human mind chops it all up into separate entities. But that's all aspect of the mind. So in understanding yourself, you can understand aspects of reality that, just didn't even come into question in the first place. So that opens up so many questions of our relation to everything else.
Yeah, and you mentioned like how we can get through life for so long, without asking the question of who am I?
Right.
And when we think about scale and time, maybe we are coming to a point with all of the war and volatility in the world where we're not going to be able to exist any longer if we don't ask the question, who am I? Because that's the kind of question that leads to revolution. And I don't like to use the word revolution because it implies, to me, it implies, war, and it implies Bernie Sanders. And I don't think that either of those things are exactly the direction we need to go. But I think that in terms of what the word revolution is supposed to mean, the way we get there is by asking the question, who am I? That's what leads to internal peace. And internal peace is what is going to lead to external peace.
Yeah, that is the truth. I mean, at the end of the day, all this, you see war and horrible things happening in the world. It all boils down to people who don't understand themselves, and they don't take the time to. I mean, they're so enveloped in their worldview and what they believe nature to be. And really, if they just took the time to understand their true self, then you would have better things to do rather than just seek the ultimate power and control and, dropping bombs on people. So that is the question. It's know thyself. That is the key thing, I think, to human beings and taking our next step forward.
Yeah, and it also makes me think of the the aspect of the UFO where it's going over our military bases and shutting down our nukes, you know?
Yeah.
I really do think that our spiritual evolution is directly connected with our inability or ability to, go to war, or our willingness or unwillingness to go to war, because that to me, it's like the ultimate thing, and it's why I don't believe in the death penalty, because I don't believe that another human being has the right to choose whether some other human being has the right to live. And I think that might be our biggest problem, is that certain groups think because you're not part of my group, you must die. Like, that makes no sense. It makes no sense on an evolutionary level or a spiritual level. And I think that both the evolution of our um, consciousness and the evolution of our physical being are dependent upon that. We need to populate the earth, not, depopulate.
Right. Yeah, and that's a big narrative we're hearing now. Too many people. Um, but yeah, you see UFOs a lot around war. I mean, they first started showing up, at least documented, the Foo Fighters in World War II. I mean, and it's been reported a lot that when war is happening, there are UFOs. Like a lot in the Middle East, supposedly they were seeing as we were warring in the Middle East. A lot of those silver orbs were being seen. And we all know about the connection with UFOs and the nuclear weapons testing, nuclear sites. You mentioned how they shut down our nukes. They also turned on Russia's nukes. So there's a big connection there. And I also want to mention um, a common thread that you see a lot with the close encounters with the beings. Like, let's talk about the Ariel school incident, where over in Zimbabwe, a craft lands outside an elementary school, and these beings come out and telepathically communicate with the children. And they always say, beware of your technology, beware of what you're doing to the planet. And another message that's often given is something similar to like, you don't know your own power, you don't understand what you're capable of. So even these non-human intelligences, these beings, are giving us the message in some of these encounters that you have to start understanding what your true potentiality is.
Yeah, and to me, our true potentiality is, it's that of love and peace. I the just the aspects that um of like mental messages that they were given had to do with environmental destruction, had to do with
Yeah.
war, all of the negative aspects of human life. And you know, it's so unfortunate that we're led by the few on our planet that are motivated by all of those negative intentions. And I mean, maybe that's just by design. Maybe that's just how
Right.
it works when a species evolves past
Yeah.
all of those things. But it bothers me, to say the least.
Well, it's like, in a sense, the negative creates the positive. So it's like, if there wasn't some negative evil, would there be a positive at all? So like, you see somebody doing a horrible thing and it motivates others to do great things, or so it's like the negative creates the positive in a sense. So it's it would be wonderful if we could just have peace. You think like everybody wants peace, but it just doesn't seem to be possible. I think the only way it's possible, and let me caveat this, which with I don't think it is possible, but the only way it would be is if everybody understood themselves. If they truly understood what they are and what that means in relation to reality as a whole. If they understood their true nature, what this is, and what this process is that's happening, that's the only way to obtain peace. But I think just as human beings, our very nature, it's not possible for all of us. There will always be at least one who looks at the rest and, decides that they can hold power over us. There's always going to be some polarity there when we're dealing with human beings.
Yeah, and then, it makes me think like, so the oneness that is, you know, the thing that connects us, what that is ultimately seems to be grounded in peace and in love. So it feels to me like, again, we talk about, can we, if we can ask the question, we can answer it. How do we create love and peace? How do we merge with the oneness of all things? But then, as you said, right now, I think it's impossible because we are motivated to ask that question, but we're also motivated to ask the question of like, how can I create the most powerful weapons so that
Right.
my group can destroy that group if it needs to?
And I think the biggest thing is it's a recognition of what's already in front of you. Because I think, it's the human mind that is layering all these concepts on top of what we're perceiving and experiencing. And it's like you talk about love, peace, and oneness. It's about recognizing that it's already there, that your actual nature is that of peace. And, to understand that is to actually rest in that and to be that rather than projecting all the chaos onto the world. I mean, everything is harmonious. But as human beings, when we just don't see it. And I think it a big part of all of this is just the way that our society is structured. I mean, the way we are taught as a child and brought up into this specific structure of Western society, and basically all societies on the planet, like set aside a couple of uncontacted tribes. We are indoctrinated in a specific way that really doesn't allow us to see things clearly, I think. And in order to make any like really groundbreaking change, you have to break that chain. So, I mean, I think it's going to have to be like a process of evolution that takes quite a while. The unfortunate thing is that now we have such powerful technology that the question is, can we last that long? Will humanity survive long enough until you get a whole planet who is looking at the world and truly understanding its nature. Meanwhile, we have nuclear weapons that can shut it all down tomorrow.
Yeah, and we seem to define peace or uh yeah, we define peace as like happiness. And happiness is temporary. And we seem to have this like autonomous aspect of our personalities that continuously fall into this cycle of, in order to avoid not being happy or to avoid pain, we seek pleasure and we seek happiness. And then the happiness that we have achieved from that seeking eventually wears off, and then comes the pain. And then we again seek happiness to take away the pain. And we're just going through this cycle over and over and over. And it's autonomous because we don't even think about it. It's just the way that we act because we live in a mode of consciousness that is reactive as opposed to responsive. And I think the concepts of like um, Aikido and the art of peace is like an antidote to that. it's an antidote to reactiveness, and it's a way to live in responsiveness, because I think if we can respond as opposed to react, our responses are oftentimes more rooted in peace and more rooted in that oneness and in progression, and reactions are more rooted in just avoiding pain essentially and avoiding negativity.
Yeah, and it seems like, I mean, the biggest issue is we never, as human beings, we never live in the present moment. We're either looking into the past and feeling regret. It's like the regret of the past, or you're seeking for something in the future. We are very rarely actually present, and I think that's the brilliance of psychedelics. Is it really nails you to the present. That's why time is totally relative in such a high degree in the psychedelic state, because you are forced to be in the present, and the present can and is eternal. So, like in the psychedelic state, that's why it feels like, a 10-minute trip on DMT can feel like eternity, because it is. I mean, your awareness is opened up, and your perception is so altered that you are able to see the truth, which is eternity in the present. Whereas human beings, we're always in our conceptual mind thinking about a future that doesn't exist and a past that doesn't exist. That's all just conceptions of the mind. Whereas if you can learn, that's like the idea of the practice is essentially just to learn to be in the now. And if you can totally accept that and live just in the now, then that's where you find peace. It's like your very nature is peace. If you take away all the layers of the mind and all the layers of your perception, and you just sit with the very core of your being, the thing that is ever present, the thing that never goes away, the I am. The I am is peace itself. It's unqualified. It's purely open, and that is love and peace. It's just recognizing that and seeing it, because that's what the whole thing is. But, as human beings, we are involved in this complex game, and it is incredible, but it's also very complex. And it's like you have to, I always think of learning about it's not about learning about the nature of yourself. It's more about unlearning. It's like peeling off layers, not adding more knowledge. It's like it's already there. It has to be by its very nature. I mean, what you are is what you are. You just have to recognize it. And I think that it would be nice if we, even as children, started bringing those questions to children more, and having kids start to dive into these ways of thinking and see what that brings in a society. Because we so often, like with our children, like we immediately enforce the idea of separateness. It's immediately just laid on top of them how they're separate, and reality is just a material physical world. You're going to grow and die. We always tell kids to really not be in the present. It's always about looking towards the future. What are you going to be when you grow up, this and that. I think it would be interesting if we tried to kind of enforce a different mode of thinking in the next generation. I often think about, if you take a human being, I think as human beings, we are just so malleable. I think we can be shaped into almost anything. So if you take a human being from a baby and you put it in an environment that is, anything you wish, I think you can bring that human to believe in almost anything and act in almost any way. I think we are that malleable with the way we can view reality and the way that we behave.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And this makes me think of the Ram Dass topic he talks a lot about, which is he calls somebody training. He's like, the second you come out of the womb and you start to become conscious, you're put into somebody training. You're taught
Hmm.
who you are. You're taught what everything else is, and eventually you really become somebody. And if you really become somebody, you get rewards in the culture. if you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, you're really somebody. And our culture reinforces somebodyness. And
Yeah.
he says that then you have to go into training to be nobody. You have to go into nobody training to then offset the somebody training.
Right.
Um, and you were speaking about how again our true nature is peace. Our true nature is love, and that just brings home the fact that I just maybe I'm a woo woo person, but I feel like just because of that fact, it means that we as a human family are going toward the direction of that oneness and that peace. And I don't think we have a choice. It's like Terrence McKenna says, or used to say, rest in peace. It's like we're on an up escalator. We don't actually have to do anything. You know what I mean? If you think about it in a certain way, you can just be here now and be at peace and quiet your mind, and you'll find that you are on an up escalator and you are going toward the ultimate goal of figuring out who you really are, which is peace.
Yeah, and the beauty of it is, because we sit here and we do talk about, humanity at large and the issues of society, which are clearly there. The real beauty is that you can acknowledge the fact that it's that you already are that. You are that. You are that peace. You can't control the world. You can't control, the wars going on, but you can recognize your nature and the beauty in reality all around you. I think often that's the issue, is that all of us as supposedly separate individuals always look to other things and like want to change it and wish we can change it and think about, oh, if only that stopped. I think if everybody stopped doing that and just recognized their nature, then I think everybody would be better off. And it sounds kind of like maybe counterintuitive, like you just said, like doing nothing. You think you see something horrible happening, you're like, oh, I gotta do something. Well, the fact of the matter is, I can't do anything about the war in Ukraine. There's nothing I can do. But, a lot of people spend their entire day fixated on things like that. And I think a good way to start healing is to just deal with yourself, know thyself. And the more people that start doing that, the less war you'll start seeing. So instead of looking outward and thinking of all these things that you need to do to change something that you cannot ever change, deal with what's in front of you. Deal with your experience of reality. It is just beyond fascinating. And then if you're courageous enough and uh, sound mind, you go into psychedelics and then you open up, a whole new door that you never thought existed. And then suddenly reality isn't so bad and it's actually beautiful and you can rest in your own peace and then see that's all that there is around you. When you look at another individual, you can see that in them and you can see that they're not actually separate from you. Because, like, in our minds, we create the separation. Like, I think of you like you're a separate person, that you just exist as a separate person. But you don't, you're never just you, you are the environment around you as well. Josh doesn't exist as like a unique, separate thing that's just, existing in a void. No, you are connected with everything around you. You are totally intact with your environment. There is no, I've never witnessed just you. You know what I mean? There is no separate you. It's always your engagement with everything around you, you don't act on behalf of yourself. Every single thing happening in reality is influencing your behavior. You know what I mean? So there's no actual like separate you. You are just the universe expressing itself and you're connected to everything else. So it could sound woo wooey, but you can literally just recognize that, see it, and then behave in that way.
The only reason it sounds woo wooey is just because it's counter to what we are normally taught. And that's the only reason, because if you just think deeply enough about it, then you come to the conclusion. And, as you were saying, like, if everybody just figured out who they were, then we wouldn't have any war. And that
Right.
brings me back to the UFO topic, and similarly to psychedelics, is that when you start, when something that you witness, see, or experience makes you question the very reality in which you live, the next question is, well, if that's not what I thought it was, like, who am I? Because I'm not
Mhm.
who I thought I was either. Because I know with psychedelics, one of the things, one of the very first things that it made me, that astonished me was I thought, how on earth is my mind capable of this? I had no idea that my mind was capable of producing what's happening right now. And that is a clear path to questioning, well, then who am I? What am I? Am I really just this brain? Am I really just my personality? Am I really just an amalgamation of my experiences? Like, what actually am I? And then that leads you down that path of asking that question, which is the key to everything. It's the key.
It is. And even if you don't wanna use psychedelics, like, you can literally just empirically investigate your direct experience and come to the 1000% conclusion, the knowing of your true nature. You just have to what you do is investigate your experience. What is it in your experience that is always present, that you are never not experiencing? That which is always present is what you actually are. And, you could say, because, and you have to really like throw out your materialist worldview because you can close your eyes. And I would say you close your eyes and my body is no longer present. And so then you're not your body. But then someone would say, well, I'm still feeling my body. It's like, no, you're feeling sensation. When you close your eyes, if you empty the mind of any conception of thought, because the only body that is existing when you close your eyes is the thought of a body. When you close your eyes, you are feeling sensations, and then you investigate the sensations. And it's really, when you really investigate it empirically, there is no body when you close your eyes. And even now, the body is just a combination of perception and sensation. So when you investigate everything in your direct experience, then you can start peeling away at it and coming to a direct conclusion of what just is always there and which always remains. And even if you want to think like more materialistically, your body, you shed like all of your cells every 7 years. So like this, that your body here, it's constantly dying and being reborn according to like materialist science. But the idea is to kind of throw all that away and just think about your pure experience. And when you do that, you come to the conclusion that, your awareness, your consciousness is the fundamental aspect of yourself. And the nature of that is emptiness and peace and love. And it cannot be, it cannot be like altered. It is always going to be that.
Yeah, and this path of investigation leads you to slowly peel away all of the layers of the veil. And the layers of the veil are essentially the ways in which we intake the information field. When you start to think about light, light is defined by the eye. Light originates within the eye. Sound originates within the ear. You start to peel away the senses and the actual way in which we take information in, you start to peel away what you think you are. And what lies behind that is simply information. And again, people like to interpret that as like this simulation, like a code or something like that. I have no idea how to interpret what this field of information is. I just consider it to be consciousness itself. But when you start to peel away those things, like as you're doing that, you're redefining who you are because you're
Right.
no longer what you see. You're no longer what you hear. You're no longer what you feel. So you're no longer the body. You're no longer the information that you think is good that you're getting from books. You're no longer the thing you're seeing on the TV. Like you're no, so that means that you are not your thoughts. And if you're not your thoughts, then who the fuck are you?
Right. And we often identify with the thoughts.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing. It's like I said, what you are is always present. Because if it's not always present, then it's not what you are. Because you, by definition, have always been present in your experience. And your thoughts are so fleeting. Your thoughts are just gone. Your thought, they come and go. You're so clearly not your thoughts. And the idea is to investigate and kind of contemplate your experience, like your perceptions, like the perception of sight. It's like we are so grounded in the materialist worldview that, we don't even think to ask a lot of these questions. Because, like, a good question to ask is, like, what is seeing made of? What is seeing made of? What is feeling made of? And we don't think about that. I mean, and when because you immediately think of the material answer. Like, you don't think what is seeing made of, you think of what is the cup made of. So you're instantly chopping your experience of a singular sight into other objects and then trying to come up with a material answer to what it could, made of atoms or whatever you would like. um you could look up at the moon and recognize that, where is your experience of seeing the moon happening? Because you immediately look at the moon and you think, wow, that's so far away. But it's actually so intimately close to you that you can't even begin to, like, you can't even. It's so close to you that it is you. Your experience of seeing the moon is so close to you. Not your conception of seeing it and then saying, like, it's so far away, but the actual experience of sight, of seeing the moon. Your experience of the moon at that moment is so intimately close that it's immeasurable, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and our initial like nature or how we've been taught is to separate ourselves from that. And I think it actually takes more effort to separate yourself from that than it does to
Ex-
recognize your oneness with it. And I think that's where the key is. And that's what McKenna means when he says you're taking that up escalator. That's what the mystics mean by be here now.
mhm. 100%. Yeah, it definitely takes more effort, but we're just conditioned that way from such a young age that it's the natural way for us. So it's like a deprogramming rather than learning more. um Same thing you can do, like, with all your perceptions. Like, I do this consciously to try to remind myself, like if you have an air conditioner running, your conceptual mind, you'll hear it and you'll be like, okay, that sound is like 5 feet away. But no, where is the actual experience of the sound taking place? It's so intimately close to you. It's like happening in you and around you and of you. So, like, the actual experience of sound, without qualifying it, is so intimately close that you can't, there's zero separation, you understand? And then, you can do that with all your senses. And I think with sight, it's the most fascinating because it's, for most people, the hardest to do that with. But it is everything you see, even if it appears at a distance, it is so intimately one and close with you. And then you can begin to kind of feel yourself as the entirety of experience and not just an imagined avatar within it. There's You're so intimately connected to it all. And when you see things that way, it suddenly makes reality seem like very incredible, impossible, mind blowing, really. Because it's so counter to the way that we're brought up and the way that we normally think about things. Um, and it's just, it does seem like a more natural way of things compared to the way of how we are brought up.
Yeah, it changes reality to a dance as opposed to a struggle.
Right. Yeah. Instead of, like, because you feel all like you're alone in this and like you're battling against all the forces, but instead of just flowing with it, being in the present and treating it as, I always like with Alan Watts when he describes or uses the analogy of music, of playing. Like, you don't like the symphony, the point of it isn't the end. It's just, it's every moment of the playing. It's not like you're waiting on the final note and finished. Like, no, music is to be enjoyed and played throughout. It exists like for its own sake.
And also,
And
what
it
he says, real quick, what he says about music is that it's dependent upon the space between the sounds, which
mhm.
I love. Yeah, when he talks about music, it's beautiful.
Yeah, and it with a lot of this stuff, it can't be, and that's like the beauty of like God. People think that God should be proven. Like, well, you have to prove it. These All this type of stuff, it's not able to be proven to another individual. It has to become, you have to be directly conscious of it yourself. It's an awareness that you need to obtain. It cannot be proven. It's a recontextualization of everything that's already in front of you. So you have to do it on your own. So that's like the beauty of finding God. Like, you it cannot be given to you. It's fully on you to discover that. And then when you discover it, the frustration is you can't give it to anyone else. And the only way you can let them taste it is through analogy and metaphor, which is like what all the religious texts are doing and what Alan Watts is doing when he's talking about music. It's just an analogy for something that cannot be spoken, that you have to become directly aware of in your own experience. And other than that, there's no other way to understand it. And then the paradox of it all is that that's all you've ever been experiencing anyway. So it's you've always been doing it. It's just the recognition of it and to actually see it for what it is, rather than what we're usually doing, which is overlaying all of our conceptual thinking on top of it and then treating that as if that's the way reality actually is.
And it's such an unnatural way, unnatural to us to think that way because we've been brought up within a materialistic paradigm that makes it difficult. And I find myself, as everybody on this path finds themselves, falling off the path and walking backwards and, misinterpreting where they're supposed to be and where they're going. But then when you've experienced something that breaks you free, you can always reference that to take you back to the path and to make sure that you're in the correct lane, even if you get off. And part of the path is going off of the path because being off of the path is where the work is. The people in your life that give you that are the hardest to come to terms with in terms of peace in yourself are representations of your work, and not just the people, but the aspects of your life, your job. It might be, it could be anything, but the hardships that we face that take us off the path put into context the work that we need to do to get back on it. So it's all, again, it's all a dance, and we shouldn't take ourselves too seriously, I don't think.
Yeah, and I love what you just said, and it's so true because very few, if any, stay on the path because our indoctrination is so deep. Like our way of how we've learned to exist is just so ingrained in us that only the very few, like the what you would call spiritually enlightened, are like truly on that path all the time, which is very difficult until it's not. It's just a matter of shedding everything and remaining in that true state of being. But it's never. I wouldn't expect anyone to always be in that state. But I like how you said, as long as you have experienced it, you always have that knowing, that recognition that you can fall back on to know, like, if you find yourself totally out of connection with your true self and how you know that reality is, if you find yourself totally out of alignment with it, at least you can fall back on your knowing and then just kind of recenter yourself in that state and then kind of move forward. Because really, all it takes is a moment to the I love the Ram Dass, to be here now. Like, that's really all it takes, is to stop for a moment and just be present and recognize you know what you are. And it's good to have an experience to fall back on to reassure yourself of that, instead of every time having to rediscover it. So if you have that experience to fall back on, just bring yourself back to the present, recognize what you already know, and then move forward accordingly.
And this is the beauty of Jake Barber's experience. and the explicit similarity of the experiences that we may have on meditation or psychedelics and that he had with this UFO. He claims that it's always guiding him. And when you hear people talk about religion and God and Jesus, when they give their life over to Jesus, God is always guiding them. When you talk about, to you or I about psychedelics, to me, it's always guiding me, and it's always guiding me in the right way. It presents uh, it presents obstacles to me that are tests, it feels like. And when I
Mm-hmm.
overcome those tests, it gives me the reward of overcoming them in the form of more spiritual prowess or getting me closer to the right lane of the path. It's extraordinary, man. And this is what I really do believe that people are seeking when they give themselves up to certain religions or whatever it may be. These spiritual, esoteric, like forms of thought are always leading you toward that.
People are craving, a spiritual aspect to their reality, and once you recognize it, that's all it is right in front of you, then it's a beauty. And with Jake Barber, he was asked, I forget exactly the question, but it was something about ontological shock. He's like, what about the ontological shock that people are going to go through? Is it going to be chaos and all that? And I agree with him in a sense. And he said, I don't think there's going to be ontological shock. I think it's going to be ontological relief,
Yes.
because people are desperate. I mean, we have, an absurd amount of people in our country on antidepressants and like all this stuff, and I think people will be relieved when they understand that there is an aspect of a spiritual aspect, a psychic aspect, something else to this reality. Because a lot of people, they at the current moment, they can't see it. It's right in front of them. They can't see it because they're just bogged down by the negativity that they experience. So something anomalous and like seemingly mystical is needed in a lot of people's lives.
Very well said, man. And I look forward to, discovering more about this, and hopefully when, we do get some sort of, more disclosure, that it's not too far into the direction of misinformation, and, we can start to really get more people like Jake Barber who are merging the nuts and bolts portions of it with the spiritual aspect of it. But, I think,
I want
no, what were we going to say?
I want, before we close out, I want to mention one more thing about Jake Barber, because I
Mhm.
just remembered we didn't touch on this, which is what he is doing now and what this his experience is guiding him to do now, which is now he has the Skywatcher project. So now he's, because I think this is important to touch on. He pretty much created a crew of guys. Like, he grabbed people from intelligence, and he's got like a psionic asset, and he's grabbed people from these programs and now has his own crew, purely, not attached to any aerospace or government. It's just his own thing, and they are attempting to bring forth the evidence that we all need for disclosure. So basically, they have their own psionic team. They're going to go out into the field and they're going to attempt to bring these craft down, get sensor data, get imagery. They're going to, attempt to do this. And that way we don't have to rely on government for disclosure. So if Jake Barber really had a mystical experience and he's really changed and he's true and pure in his heart and he's doing this, maybe we don't have to rely on them. Maybe we will get disclosure sooner than we think, in with this Skywatcher program. I mean, he has, everything he needs supposedly. He's a wealthy guy, I guess, and so he's got all the instruments, he's got the psionic assets. So we'll see what happens, but that's something that we should all be following, is that Skywatcher project, because then we don't have to, rely on a corrupt government or, aerospace companies.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, and I can't wait to see where that goes.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And if all of you can't wait to see where we go and what we talk about next, tune in to our podcast And take a look at our Instagram at Pursuit of Infinity Pod, our website, pursuitofinfinity.com. We're everywhere. Just Google us, search us, and like, subscribe, all that good stuff.